on this episode of the Business Communicators.
I hope we get to the point where our podcast is so big that we have like NFL stars and professional athletes and actors and actresses coming to us for medical advice. If we could do that, I think we fully made it.
You're listening to the Business Communicators. And now your hosts, Austin Stepp and Thomas Bain.
Welcome to Season 4, Episode 4 of the Business Communicators, a podcast that is the number one rated podcast in the world, and that's a verifiable fact. And Thomas, this is actually the second time that we're recording this episode. Not because we messed up the first time, it's because a lot of stuff happened in the time since we've recorded, in the less than 24 hours since we've recorded. So we knew that in order for this to be timely, we had to re-record some of the segments. So if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're watching this on LinkedIn and you see a wardrobe change, that's because we've recorded on two separate days. But Thomas, how is your weekend going so far?
It's going really well. I got to spend some time with the family this morning. We did a model rocket launch, so that was good. Yes, I was going to say, I'm hoping that we splice some of our old footage into it because a lot of our conversation about polling and other stuff was really timely.
Yeah,
it's also interesting that we were talking about Aaron Rodgers as he was on the podcast.
As he was on the podcast.
The exact stuff we were talking about.
Yeah. And by the way, Thomas, your hat's a little frayed and it's covering up your eye a little bit. So.
Well, but you see, if you notice correctly, I like to go old school sometimes and establish that where we come from. So ideally, that at some point in time, as I start to decorate the house, you might see some like old vintage ads and things like that. Being an advertising communications PR person, and so this is actually the first logo for the Astros that brought the World Series to Texas. But they were wearing this logo.
2005, absolutely. The brick red. Yeah.
And so I refuse to buy a new Astros hat until this one completely falls apart.
I'm impressed that it's lasted 16 years, so good job on that. But really quickly, if you do hear any background noise on either my end or Thomas's end, it's Saturday, it's the weekend, and if we're bringing you sort of like an emergency podcast, that's kind of what happens. But Thomas, let's start off with the the big news that's obviously happening right now in Houston. So Travis Scott, who is one of the biggest, I guess, stars in media, dating one of the Jenners, Kardashians. I don't know. I can't keep track, but he is a Houston-based rapper, and he's been hosting an Astroworld Fest since, I believe, 2018. Year two is 2019. It was canceled last year because of COVID, and Friday night was, I guess, night 1 or 2 of the festival. It was a 3-day festival. More than 100,000 tickets sold, and the festival was canceled last night. And 8 people are reported dead. More than 23 people hospitalized. 300 people have, were treated on scene last night. It's an absolutely tragic story, and I think we're going to look at it from a crisis communications lens and kind of, what went wrong, maybe how it could have been prevented, how could they have seen this coming? And I think, when you initially look at some of the footage that was circulating on the internet Friday afternoon after we recorded the podcast, I guess the gates for the concert opened, maybe 2-3 p.m., somewhere in that time frame. And there was footage of people who did not have tickets rushing the gate, jumping over the barricades, running through security, and just a really, really bad scene. But if you look at some of the promotional videos that were being shown, for Astroworld, this type of behavior was encouraged, and it took it up a notch during the actual festival itself. Travis Scott's set, and we're not going to show any of the footage, but if you want to go check it out, it's all over the Houston Chronicle, it's all over the local news stations, it's all over Twitter. You can find it yourself. But absolutely tragic to see people get trampled, and crowd control was a major issue. But Thomas, what are your initial thoughts from the Astroworld Fest?
You hear 100,000 tickets and you think that's massive, and it is massive. It's a lot of people. I think, and I hadn't seen any of the promotional videos and things along those lines. And yes, tickets are expensive, and people are there to enjoy it. And my thoughts and prayers go out to anybody affected by this unfortunate tragedy. They do have some centers set up. So if you're hearing this and you still haven't heard from your loved one, reach out to them to please try to find them. But this goes back to the whole point of on setup, is while it's a true pain in the rear when you go through the airport or you go to a concert to get funneled into the different sections and things like that, part of that reason is for crowd control. It's not just to get pat down to make sure you're not carrying any weapons in there. It's to limit how many people are going to which areas. Once you're in, it's a free for all, and my heart breaks for them. It really does. On the crisis comms, I know before this we were talking about the PR firm that's handling it, and they're under their keep. Really, they really are. And my heart also goes for Travis Scott, because he's the king of promotions. He had the Cactus Jack with it, and he hosted the thing on what was the video game? Why am I going blank on video game? Fortnite, where like 400,000 people signed up to see it. And granted, it's a video game and you can rush the stage there, but this is the real world. So I don't know really as much as what we can try to do to prevent it, because there's tragedies all over the place. There really, really are. You hear about the Vegas shooting, which again, total didn't need to happen.
Right.
And other concerts, I've been to concerts before where I've been on the front row and felt like I was going to get smushed against the row. So,
yeah, I was actually at a festival at the same grounds that this took place back in 2016 for a festival. I think it was like Free Press Summerfest is what it was called. And it was the same type situation, right? I mean, you are pushed up against the rail, but Free Press Summerfest didn't have these type of crowds. But if you look at the initial statement that was released by Astroworld Fest, it released this around 5-6 a.m. So, 6-7 hours after the incident. It says, our hearts are with the Astroworld Festival family tonight, especially those we lost and their loved ones. We are focused on supporting local officials however we can. With that in mind, the festival will no longer be held on Saturday. As authorities mentioned in their press conference earlier, they are looking into the series of cardiac arrests that took place. If you have any relevant information on this, please reach out to @Houston Police. Thank you to our partners at the Houston Police Department, Fire Department, and NRG Park for the response and support. So that's the initial statement that was put out. I know that one thing that we stress in a crisis situation is to try to get statements out within the first, hour to 2 hours. And so this took place 6-7 hours after. And so it's just, not a good look all around. And I know there's going to be a lot of, videos that are, gonna tell the story. It's interesting because when we talk about a crisis, right, you've got to have statements prepared beforehand, right? You for all types of scenarios, you've got to know kind of what you're going to do when a crisis does happen. You have to get something out there within that first hour, that first 2 hours. From there, if you don't, that's when public opinion starts to form, right? That's when public opinion starts to harden. And so when people start to see these videos that are going viral on Twitter, on Instagram, on Snapchat, on all these different platforms, they're making their opinions, right? Whether, security was good, whether it was bad, they've already made their opinions. And so at that point, you have limited time to actually influence the conversation. And when you release a statement 6-7 hours later, people aren't going to hear you. If you actually read the Houston Chronicle stories that are out, they interview so many victims, people who were there, people that actually were passed out, sharing what they saw, sharing the tweets that they posted, sharing the videos, because that's the thing. When you have 50 to 100,000 people at a festival like this, everyone's got their cameras up, everyone's recording everything. So there's going to be so much evidence to comb through. It's pretty wild. And so for Astroworld to release a statement, I know it was overnight, but you've got to get something out there within the first hour to 2 hours.
Even if it is, our hearts and minds go out to the people. We're currently assessing the situation. Go here for more information. You need something. And while we talk crisis comms with this incident, it also goes with internal comms and change management. It's so many times everybody talks to everybody in the company, but the information is not released till 2 or 3 weeks after the decision's made, or hey, we're launching this next week, and nothing about here are the details, here's this, here's that. And to your point, you hit the nail on the head, is people are forming their opinions and the rumor mill starts. They're finding the different informations and everybody's going to it. Yes, in a crisis, it's condensed. To your point, it should, the message should have been out within an hour, maybe 2 at max.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to get more information as, obviously the investigation goes on. The concert, the festival was canceled. And it's really a tragedy all the way around. Obviously for the 8 people that were killed, there was a lot of people that were injured. And I think it kind of overshadows, some of the good work that Travis Scott had done here in Houston leading up to the festival. But I think, part of the problem is when you have, teenagers at these festivals with drugs, and parents just dropping their kids off. I mean, there were kids as young as 10 years old that were injured and hospitalized. Like, how old's your daughter, Thomas?
She's 6.
Can you imagine in 4 years sending her to a festival with 50 to 100,000 people by herself?
I can't imagine sending her to a festival by herself in 10 years or
Yeah.
15 years when she's like in college, like making her own decisions. It's like, I want to go to this festival. No, we really shouldn't. Why is that? Because I did it and I know what that goes on there.
Yeah. So negligence all the way around. And I think part of that comes down to pre-planning, like not having enough security in place, not making it, not putting out videos. And actually, we're gonna drop the video in right now so we can show you what the promotional video looked like for the festival. So go ahead and check this out.
Astroworld Fest in full swing, but now with extra security.
We want to show you what it looked like when the festival opened its doors today.
Up to summer strong, and we got another stretch. November come, won't you pop out at the fest? Feeling on my body, it's a movie, it was just one night, it felt like a sci-fi. We dodging the sun, only way we come alive. Even on your run, how you do that, how you do that?
So what's your thoughts after looking at that video, Thomas? I mean, when I see that, I see, and I read reports on like Reddit and the Chronicle of people saying that, there was a lack of security in 2018. There was a lack of security in 2019. Both years had really bad crowd control. What is your initial reaction after seeing that and then watching the video?
Part of it is hindsight's 2020. Is one, NRG is not necessarily set up for festivals. Yes, they have security. Yes, there's a fence line around it. And when they talk about turning it into Houston politics, turning it into a park, I'm like, how can you turn it into a park sponsored by if you have a fence around it? But the fence line there is not necessarily designed for festivals.
Right.
And so looking at it through a different lens now, knowing that the tragedy and people jumping the fence, everything like that, it makes it look like the fences could have come down any minute now. There's nothing more than the porta fence. And out of everything that comes out of this, and this is where I'm hoping that a grad student who's listening to our podcast or a PR class or an advertising class or marketing class is using this as a case study somewhere in the future about, hey, what can you do different for the logistics? What can you do different for your crisis comm media thing? So that the people who are injured and unfortunately killed, their legacy lives on at least somewhat.
Yeah, absolutely terrible situation. And again, our hearts go out to, those that lost loved ones and those that were impacted by this incident. But Thomas, when we originally recorded the podcast on Friday, we had spoken about Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers, as we mentioned in the podcast, when we actually recorded. So you might not hear that version. We haven't edited this together, so we don't know how much we're going to splice everything around. But when we originally recorded, we spoke about how he said that he was immunized back in August when he was asked about his vaccination status. And, for a player like Aaron Rodgers, who's one of the biggest stars in the NFL, plays a really high profile position. If he misses a game or two, it could be detrimental to his team's season. So when it came out that he was going to miss 1, possibly 2 games because of COVID-19, it was broadly assumed that he was vaccinated because he used the term immunized. It turns out that wasn't the case. He had used, homeopathic treatment to boost his antibody levels, and the NFL Players Association and the NFL said that does not count as being fully vaccinated. So when he tested positive, although he says that he feels fine and that he could play on Sunday if, he had the flu or something like that, he's not playing. While we were originally recording, he went on the Pat McAfee Show. And if you're not familiar with Pat McAfee, he is a former punter in the NFL, played college football at West Virginia. He is a brilliant media mind. He has a show on YouTube and Sirius XM that is one of the highest rated sports talk shows out there. And he's got a very, exclusive relationship with Aaron Rodgers, in the sense that every Tuesday, Aaron Rodgers comes on his show and talks for about an hour. And he's the only person with that kind of access. So when the news broke about him testing positive, Pat McAfee shot him a text and said, "Hey, come on, let's talk about it. We want to know more." And let's just say the interview didn't go well, depending on, who you're looking at. Aaron Rodgers compared himself to MLK. He basically used the term like woke mob, He was just using a lot of like the Donald Trump rhetoric. And it just wasn't a really good look. And maybe he thought it was a safe environment to go on Pat McAfee. And again, if you watch the full interview, Pat McAfee is not really pushing him with questions. He's just letting Rodgers talk and talk and talk. And that is the one thing that we always say in crisis communications is if a microphone's in your face, you don't have to keep talking. Get in and out with your messaging and just leave it there. And so I'm going to play a quick clip. And I want you guys to listen to this. So this is Aaron Rodgers actually talking about how he's been treating his COVID-19 diagnosis.
I'm 48 hours in, and I consulted with a now good friend of mine, Joe Rogan, after he got COVID, and I've been doing a lot of the stuff that he recommended in his podcasts and, on the phone to me. And
so when I watch that, I think of two things. One, I hope we get to the point, Thomas, where our podcast is so big that we have like NFL stars and professional athletes and actors and actresses coming to us for medical advice. If we could do that, I think we've fully made it. But secondly,
we had Emmanuel Sanders come to our podcast and talk about journaling and setting goals.
Fair. But the second thing is, if you look at Pat McAfee, when he mentions that he got his medical, advice from Joe Rogan, he starts to do this with his hands, putting it over his face, trying to cover up his laugh. Not a good look for Aaron Rodgers.
While we talk about some of the negatives there after the podcast and reading through some of his comments and the reasons for it, Aaron Rodgers did not want to take the vaccine, the first two, Moderna and Pfizer, because there's ingredients that are in there. And he's like, I'm allergic to these ingredients in these first two. And so that's the perfect reason to, hey, I'm going to hold off a little bit on these vaccines because there's some other stuff that kind of goes into play for her. But that also goes back to society as a whole. Is that's why you have herd immunization, is so you can protect the people who can't get the vaccine because they're allergic to something in there or something in there. So for that, it's good. I also think it was good that I learned that he petitioned the NFL to say, look, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm doing it. This is why I'm doing it. Can I get a waiver for it? So his statement is the NFL knew. Green Bay knew that he was not vaccinated.
He even said the local media knew.
Exactly. So I'm like, okay.
Set on it.
I was like, great, good job. And then it goes to, hey, let's get medical advice from somebody. And it goes back to, who do you trust?
Right.
What is trust? I trust somebody who's had COVID, who recovered from it, who wasn't vaccinated. And in that sense, Joe Rogan does those. Is he a medical professional? No. Does he know how to throw a mean right hook in the UFC octagon? Yes.
The problem that I have with Aaron Rodgers is not that he's unvaccinated, and he was very transparent, I guess, with his team, but it seems like he maybe didn't follow all of the protocols that he should have in terms of like mask wearing that his NFL Players Union agreed to. So when your union agrees to something, you have to be in compliance with something like that. But the issues that I have is that, even if you were to say that he's allergic to something, fine, leave it at that. But he spent another 30 minutes talking about the woke mob, the cancel culture, and how he was going to now be a pariah. And if you look at some of the, tweets that are out there, I love the part in any sports movie where the coach goes, get out there and just do whatever you feel is best for you individually based on things you've heard in podcast. Another one is, I wonder if Jake from State Farm knew. Another one is, I just saw someone called Aaron Rodgers, throw Rogan, I'm dead. Are we sure we know where Aaron Rodgers was on January 6th? Is Aaron Rodgers trying to prove that COVID is fake or that CTE is real? So there is just so much out there. And then Molly Knight from, I think formerly of the LA Times, she tweeted out QBanon. So there's a lot of people having fun with this. But to me, it's just a really fascinating example of, maybe it's, even if you do think that a show is friendly toward you, it can be dangerous. It was great for Pat McAfee to be able to get that interview that every single person wanted throughout the entire week. He was that exclusive interview. But for Aaron Rodgers, maybe he felt too comfortable and just opened up a can of worms.
Every time we get on this podcast, I have to check my mindset, because we talk about controversial issues.
Yeah.
We really, really do. And I hope that our audience understands that we come from it from an objective standpoint. It's not this versus that. It's not anything like that. It's just, here's what we know. Here's what our thoughts on it are. But understanding, I think it was you, Austin, when and a previous employer, when we were talking media relations and crisis training, and you were saying that even nowadays, you record the recording of the interview with it because something can be taken out of context so quickly, 100%. So easily. And so that you have that response built, that if something is taken out of context, granted with Aaron Rodgers, it's not necessarily taken out of context, but I think you hit the nail on the head is one, you're always on camera. I remember doing mine. There's nothing off the record. If you say, hey, this is off the record, you better have a really, 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 really good relationship with that reporter to truly be off the record, because it's not off the record, period.
Yeah, and just because you ask for off the record doesn't mean it's guaranteed.
Exactly.
And I do want to say something real quick, Thomas, because I think you brought up a really good point. We do talk about controversial issues, but that's okay if you disagree with us. That's okay if we disagree with you. We might have opinions that you agree with us on and that you disagree with us on. But at the end of the day, we want everyone to have a conversation and have mutual respect for one another. Whether we agree or disagree, we need to be able to have these conversations because that's something that is so difficult in our society right now is, people, maybe disagreeing and then, canceling one another. Like, we should actively listen to people and have these uncomfortable conversations, because I think that allows us to have a better understanding of where people are coming from and maybe who they are as people.
It's funny because literally last week I was watching the 2004 movie, The Alamo, and it talks about how Texas became its own country and everything like that. And so for people who aren't from Texas, Texas was its own country. The Alamo is something that's near and dear to a lot of Texans' hearts. Yes, there's a whole lot of controversy about what really happened. Yes, there's a whole lot of controversy about who was there. But in the movie, and for this example here, before the main attack started, the Spanish Army would play a band, and then it would start the night barrage of the cannonballs. So whether it's Texas lore or actually really happened, supposedly Davy Crockett got up on the top of the Alamo one night and played the fiddle with the band. And in the movie, that's the one night they didn't bombard the Alamo. And his statement was, sometimes we just all need to play a concert together. and I think it's so true is while we do talk about this, and as if you have that conversation, you come to it not as I'm right, you're wrong, as, hey, what's your point of view? Here's my point of view. Here's where my point of view might not be the best. Here's where your point of view might not be the best. But to truly have those conversations is where it comes into play.
You're listening to the Business Communicators.
The elections out of Virginia was interesting, and the polling about
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Yeah, thank you. Where there was a poll that came out 2 or 3 weeks prior to the election, and it was just wrong. I vividly remember the picture from the 50s where the president's holding it up, saying that he lost the election. As
Dewey defeats Truman. Yeah.
That's what goes through my head. And so what are your thoughts? Because we're communicators, you external, I do measurement, and I've done voice customer, voice of employee. There's a whole lot of different ways that this kind of goes from it. And so I wanted to see what your take is on, one, polling and accuracy, and two, why is the media releasing it?
Yeah. So media always needs something to talk about, right? Especially during campaign season. I think they need data to, pass along a narrative that candidate A is doing better than candidate B, or maybe candidate B has a lot of ground to make up, and here's what they need to do to make up that ground. But the problem is, dating back to 2016, the polls, whether it's the New York Times, whether it's 538, whether it's, the Harris poll, so many different polls that are out there have been wrong, in terms of margin of victory. And even if they did ultimately predict that the right candidate would win, like, for example, in New Jersey, they did project that the Democratic governor would win. The race was a lot closer than the polls indicated it would be. And if you go back to 2016, 538 said that Donald Trump had a 38% chance of winning the 2016 election. And then you see throughout the night that it shifts, that it goes back and forth on a pendulum. And ultimately, he won the election. In 2020, I think it was pretty well assumed that Biden would win on election night. But there were states that were a lot closer than the polling indicated that it would be. And so I do think there is value in polling, right? It gives you insights on, what is the pulse of America thinking? What are my customers thinking when it comes to a certain product or a certain campaign strategy that we have going on? But I remember raising this question in 2016 or early 2017 at a all hands meeting at a company that I worked for, because we did a lot of polling. Were consumers understanding our message? How did they view our brand amongst our competitors? And with the inaccuracies that I saw in the 2016 election, I asked the question, can we be sure that our data in our polling is actually correct? And the answer was, we feel confident about it. And so at that point, you think, okay, maybe 2016 was just an aberration. But we're seeing that more and more polling is just inaccurate when it's proven by results. And so what is the cause of that? Is it because a lot of people have gotten rid of their landlines? Is it because people don't pick up their phone? Are people picking up their phone usually a certain type of demographic or age or political bias? And so there's a lot of questions that I have whether or not polls are even remotely accurate and how much we should rely on polls. But Thomas, I think you come from kind of a different perspective on polling, that maybe it's not the polls that are wrong, but the polls are maybe keeping people away from the ballot box.
First part is people can cherry pick how they want the polls to go. I had a good friend. There was 5 of us in a group, and he did something stupid. And I said, I took a random sample of 20% of our group, and they agreed 100% that you did something stupid. He's like, you only served one person. I'm like, yep. And it was also me. Yeah. So it kind of also goes back to the show is like, hey, Austin, raise your hand if you think this is the #1 podcast. And both of us raise our hand. 100% agree that we're the #1 podcast for business communications in the world. And so there's a whole lot of sample bias. If you're doing the in-person, whoever the person doing the interview normally skews more towards people that look like them. If you only do phones, landlines, then you miss out on the cell phone population. And so my thought is you really need to target or get those big companies that show that do it right because of the bias in there. But then the second part of that comes into play are some of these polls self-fulfilling prophecies? Meaning that I want a survey to prove what we're doing is good, or I want to prove that my candidate is doing better. I think a lot of the surveys, to your point, are great internal. Hey, what's our market share? Hey, what's our customers truly think of us? Hey, what's this? What's that? But releasing it to the public 2 or 3 weeks prior, because I think a lot of both the Democrats and the Republicans are crying foul on this information being released because, it's been shown that nobody wants to vote for a loser. We live here in Texas, so you hear a lot of people who say my vote doesn't count because this is such a red state. I'm not going to go vote. My vote doesn't count. But if you see a poll 2 weeks before and your candidate's losing by 50%, 45% or something like that.
What's the incentive for you to go out?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so I'm almost to the point where maybe these should be op-eds, opinion pieces more so than front page news. Or the media should do a better job educating. Here's what the polls are saying. Here's what they do. And I'm looking at all of the 4 major ones. I'm looking at all the major newspapers because it goes back to you can look at I think Ed Emmett said it best at an IABC luncheon a long time ago when he was teaching at Rice, said, if you want to see something interesting, watch the 4 major news networks. They'll cover the same story and you'll come out with 4 different beliefs for the exact same facts. And so I think the media needs to step up and own, hey, this is a research piece. It's designed for XYZ. Here's what we did. And that the research should be there. Without that, then all we're doing is just fueling more fear. Let's go back to the Facebooks and divide America.
Yeah. I mean, you look at margin of error in polling. Margin of error, every single poll is going to have like a -2.5 or +/-2.5, which means that if you did the poll 100 times, that it would come within that range. So, plus 2.5, minus 2.5 on either side. So 100 times, that's what it would be. The problem is some of these margins of error in reality are 11 points off. And that means that the actual results of the election are not even remotely close within the margin of error. But I do see your point that, perhaps, polling, it does, those voters that are on the fence that are so critical and actually, maybe shifting a policy one way or the other, you're not incentivized to go out if okay, well, the person I want to win, they're not going to win, so I'm just going to stay home. I get that. So maybe that comes with just rewriting the elections. I don't know. I host a podcast on called Cautious Coffee. We're actually talking about different voting alternatives, and one was sort of like a lottery. And this is a really fun thought experiment. But maybe you have people that want to run for office, and then it's a lottery based on who wins. And the legislator, for example, it's determined on certain issues, similar to a jury duty, right? As a jury is picked to determine a case one way or the other. Maybe there's a certain policy on the table, tax incentives for a local school district or something like that. And you are elected as part of your duty. Maybe you're called by a jury to go in and determine what the outcome is. And I thought that was fascinating. It's probably, harder to do in principle. It was a fun thought experiment. But yeah, I know in a moment we're going to talk about Aaron Rodgers. And to me, this comes down to just polling in general, how polling does create biases. And in college football, which we're both huge fans of,
Yes,
this is a major, major issue because there's so many biases in place with preseason polls, right? Alabama, every single year, they're going to start the football season 1, 2, or 3, or 4, somewhere in that range. And then the SEC, because it's been perceived for years that they are the dominant league because Alabama wins the national championship almost every year, that every team in the SEC is good. And so you have 8, 9, 10 teams in the SEC that are within the top 30, 35 teams in the country. And so you see this bias exist in the polls. If a Texas A&M beats Alabama, then by golly, Texas A&M, even though they have 2 losses and a close win against Colorado, they're definitely a top 15 team. Maybe if you watch them play, maybe they're not, but they beat Alabama on a consistent basis. No. And the problem is when you get later in the season and you start having these committees, like the College Football Playoff Committee come in, they're ranking these Power 5 conferences. They're giving them the benefit of the doubt, that a close loss is better than, a win for a smaller school who, you have Cincinnati, the number 2 team, according to the coaches and the AP poll, but in the college football playoff poll, they're number 7 because they don't play against these name brand teams. So polling doesn't just impact the political side. It impacts sports. It impacts businesses. Biases. I don't know that you can have a poll that is fully removed of biases.
and yeah, being a sports fan and the college playoff, and so we talk the polls, the top 25 polls. We love to talk preseason. The Astros lost the World Series, even though on the polls we should have won on paper. But that's why we play the sports. And to your point, Cincinnati, these implications for the top 4 have millions of dollars attached to this implication. Yep. Millions of dollars, probably close to $1 billion, because that's an extra game for television revenue. That's an extra game for the conference. That's an extra game for this. And so Cincinnati being the perfect example, and yes, they're gonna move over to a Power 5 conference in the next probably 2 to 3 years, but them not getting put into there, where there's 4 spots in the college football playoffs, 4 spots, and so one, they need to expand the college football playoff system. I'm a fan of 8 teams to kind of pick up a little bit difference. But if you're a top 10 team, your chances of beating the number 1 team are there. To your point, A&M beating Alabama, are they going to win all the time? No, but it's a lot closer than you care to admit. That's why March Madness and college basketball is so good, that a 16 seed was able to knock off a number 1 seed one time in the tournament history. But that possibility is there, where your smaller schools or your smaller conferences aren't even allowed to play in there. Appalachian State beating Michigan a couple years ago.
Yeah, let's just take some revenue in this conversation. So if you look at the college football playoff, and this is why this polling matters financially to these universities, the Power Five conferences, the ACC made $78 million last year in bowl payouts. And again, these are distributed to all of the schools. So it's like a bonus at the end of the year. Big 10, 79 million, Big 12, 78 million, SEC, 76 million, Pac 12, 70 million. So all of those schools are relatively similar in terms of payouts. The American Athletic Conference, 27 million. That's a huge gap. And so having a school like a Cincinnati maybe polling a little bit higher is the difference between, a school getting a $2 million payout and a school getting a $10 million payout. And so it's a huge financial incentive. So I don't know what the solution is.
Well, and it's funny, you're talking about like the SEC playing each other. And I think we need to try to get someone from the SEC on our podcast to talk to
Southeastern Conference, not the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Well, we'll take some SEC because it is earnings season too. But the football SEC conference, because their bowl season, they worked very hard to craft that they are the best
100%.
Conference in the world. They cherry pick the bowl games. Like it's not like most conferences who said, okay, year one, you're going to the Rose Bowl. Year two, you're going to the Idaho Spud Potato Bowl. Year three, you're going to, I don't know the rest of them off the top of my head. But where the SEC comes in is they'll turn around and say, okay, you're number 2 and you're number 4, but the number 4 matches better to the team that they're playing. So they'll put the number 4 versus number 2 to make it work the SEC. So they're in essence stacking the deck in their favor. So they work very hard. Kudos to them. But is it good for sports? I don't know that.
Is it good for the podcast? I mean, do people want to hear us talk about college sports and college football revenue? I don't know.
I don't know either. But while we're talking,
we'll find out when we look at the listen rates and at 20 minutes of the conversation, the numbers change.
Yes.
You're listening to the Business Communicators.
Well, Thomas, I could definitely say that this is probably one of the most interesting podcast recordings that we've done. Only since we recorded over 2 separate days, we are wearing 2 separate clothing from when we first started recording to the second time that we recorded. And we're not really sure how this is going to sound. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, but we hope that you enjoyed it, this episode of the podcast. But Thomas, any parting words?
Thoughts and prayers out to all that are involved with Astroworld, and future concert goers. Please be mindful. Don't let this be a sign that you shouldn't go to concerts or you shouldn't go to festivals, but just be mindful of your surroundings, really, when it goes down to it. I'm hoping that our listeners enjoy the fast chains, because at one point in time, a long time ago, I watched America's Got Talent, and there's a couple people that did the fast chains. I'm like, maybe we should try to figure that out. We should maybe that. So if you have any fast changers or any more from AGT, we'll also take you on our podcast, because we've had a couple. So also, I think we're a lot closer to maybe not Aaron Rodgers, but having other NFL stars or professional athletes reach out to us to help break news for them.
Well, Thomas, I had fun on this episode of the podcast, and we want to thank everyone for listening to the Business Communicators Season 4, Episode 4. We've got some fun guests lined up for you. I think right now we've got like 6 or 7 guests lined up in the upcoming months, so we're definitely going to be turning out the content, and we want you to be a part of that journey. So definitely interact with us, like us, comment us, send us feedback. Positive, negative. We definitely want to improve the show and make it more valuable for you as communications and marketing professionals. So, Thomas, on behalf of my co-host, Patty Horn, who's not here, Thomas Bain, my name's Austin Satin. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the Business Communicators. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review.